Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits using technology. Joining me today is Carol Hamilton to talk about strategic planning and DEI. Carol, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Alex. Thank you for having me on the show.
One of my first questions out of the gate is asking about your superhero origin story. That is to say, how did you get started working with nonprofits in the first place?
Yeah, and I love that you frame that as a superhero. After college, got started working at an organization at a small business that helped people get on talk shows, and it was basically publicity, PR. And so it's kind of fun, full circle, to come back to doing podcasts now. But when I moved back to my hometown, which is Washington, D.C., and at that point, I wanted to make a shift because when I worked in the job of helping people get on radio shows, we were dealing with all comers. So it was all persuasions, all types of causes, and I wanted to really hone in on supporting the organizations and the missions that I believed in personally and kind of had that alignment with my values. And so that's what prompted me to step into the nonprofit sector. And so over the course of my career, I've worked for a variety of different organizations that centered on originally an anti-poverty coalition, a women's employment empowerment organization, and a couple different education-related associations. So worked with a variety of different missions, but over the years just became more and more interested in how people do the work and how organizations can be more effective.
And I should mention to the listeners that you have two, at least I know of two main elements of that occupy your time. One of them is your Grace Social Sectors Consulting, and the other one is your own podcast called Mission Impact.
That's right.
Maybe you can just explain a bit about what each one does and why you decided to do a podcast in the first place.
Yeah. So as I said, through my career, I became more and more interested in the how of the work that people do. I mean, a lot of times people, if they're thinking about getting into the nonprofit sector, the advice that people give is find your passion and follow that, and find a mission that you can support. And certainly that was part of my journey, but I became more and more interested in the how of the work. And so that led me to doing a master's in organization development, and out of that, becoming a consultant. And so started Grace Social Sector Consulting in 2018. And I focus in on strategic planning, helping organizations map their impact and help them assess their portfolio of services and take a strategic look at those and what they might let go of. And along the way, I was connecting with more and more interesting people who work with nonprofits and was having conversations with them one-on-one. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to share those conversations and kind of make that a public forum? And that's what prompted me to start Mission Impact.
Love it. Yeah. Okay, let's jump in then to the strategic planning side of the conversation. I was reading a bit about your blog and on your website, and I was watching that one of the things you've noticed is that a lot of nonprofits believe or expect strategic planning is more of like a one-time event. It's a burst. You do it once, you forget about it for the rest of your journey, and that's it. And I was curious to know, why is that? Why do people think it's only a one-time thing? Because I think there's only very few things in life you only do once, kind of thing. And this seems like it's already, like, I would think that it would be a reoccurring event. So I was surprised to see that it happens, or some people expect it to happen only once.
And maybe it's not that it happens only once, but it kind of is a one-day thing. And through the pandemic, not being able to meet in person, not being able to do the traditional kind of 1 day, 1.5 day retreat, moving everything online. One of the opportunities that brought was actually chunking out the planning process so that you could do it in smaller parts, have some time in between, and enable people to kind of have some time to think. And so, I mean, organizations are back to wanting to bring everybody together, and there's certainly a lot of value in that. And I'm trying to think about how can I bring in that different pace that the online opportunity brought as well. And so I think also, it takes some resources to do strategic planning, time, some time beyond the work that the organization is doing. And so sometimes it's hard for organizations to commit to that. And so it can, kind of go year after year and they haven't done their planning. But to my mind, it's one of those things where you invest some time and you get a longer term payoff for it. And it should be something that you're doing cyclically, probably every 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, that makes more sense to separate it out. And so I got the impression from doing it virtually that actually makes it easier to do so, because getting everybody, like you said, in the same room for a full day can be very challenging, especially if they need to keep operations running and do this at the same time. So I guess one of the advantages of doing it virtually is you have the ability of saying, instead of doing 1 8-hour day, we can do 4 sessions of 2 hours. And that works out better, not only for you, but for the organization, gives them more time to breathe and to think about and reflect and follow up. Would you say that's all true?
Yeah, and I mean, I think there are pros and cons to each way of doing things. I think what was interesting was that people thought it was impossible to do that kind of planning online, that you just couldn't do it because they'd only ever done it by gathering everybody in a room and having those conversations. But, there were some benefits that people realized, that it made it more accessible. It was easier for volunteers to fit in a 2-hour session versus dedicating a whole weekend. It eliminated, obviously all the things that we can do with virtual, eliminating travel expense and those kinds of other expenses. And then on the flip side, especially for volunteers, maybe if it's a national organization, one of the benefits of volunteering is actually getting to know all the people that you're working with and being in person with them, and then having those casual kind of social times around the official meeting can augment that experience. So I don't think it's one way is better than the other, but each can bring different benefits to the organization.
Because I love talking about technology, and this obviously is a technology-enabled process, I imagine there must be some kind of tooling that you use to be able to keep everybody on the same page, like a Miro board or a lucid chart, or some kind of ability to aggregate all the collective knowledge that you guys are producing during that session. So is it something like you have a screen sharing session and then you're working on a Word document or a Google document or these kinds of Miro boards? Or what other tools that you use that help you achieve all of this that you would have done, with a whiteboard traditionally in person?
Right. It's taking all those, the pile of flip charts and Post-it notes and Sharpies and other markers that I've got piled up in a storage closet from doing in-person facilitation. And then how do you do all of that online? And I think there are lots of different tools that you can use. A simple Google Doc shared between everybody can be, a first step towards that. Jamboard, which is a Google product, which is a very simple whiteboard. Sometimes people use it in combination with Google Slides to get people's input. And I try to, and others are Miro, as you mentioned. I tend to use Mural, which does essentially the same thing. What I like about it, it has a little more sophistication and enables you to have one board that encompasses everything that you're doing throughout a session, so you can go back and forth and see how things build on each other. But it does take, on the part of the participants, I tend not to use it unless I have the sense that the group as a whole is a little more tech savvy, a little more just not tech phobic and comfortable with learning something new. And so really for me, it's always trying to match the tool with the group so that everyone is able to participate. And even I had groups where they had members of their board who had been long retired and so were not as comfortable on the computer. And they, even a Google Doc was more than they were comfortable using. And so we'd use other methods. I would have them email me their input at a certain point, or ask them to put it in the chat, and I would put it on the doc for them. So there's lots of different ways to work around, and really making sure that as I'm sure you are always asking people to do, which is have the technology work for you versus you working for the technology.
Exactly. Yeah, you gotta meet the client or the organization where they are, as opposed to forcing them to adapt to you.
Exactly.
I'm curious to know, related to that water cooler type of conversation, is there anything that you can do or do to help reproduce that in a virtual environment? Or is that something that you leave more in the hands of the nonprofit?
I mean, I think there's definitely things that you can do in any meeting to bring, make it people first, make it relationship over content by asking people to do a check-in of some sort, depending on the size of the group. They may be doing that as a whole group, answering a question. There are fun ways to help people learn how to use the tool. And I worked with a group recently where they all knew each other already, so I didn't feel like I needed to do as much of the getting to know you part. But I had them, but they needed to learn how to use Mural. And so I had them fill in a little Mad Lib where essentially the group crowdsourced the story. And it just was a fun way to kind of start the meeting, but then also help them in a really low stakes environment get used to using the tool. So I always want to include some type of warm up at the beginning that helps people get comfortable with a tool, get comfortable with the who's in the room, maybe learn something that they didn't know about each other. And then without it, not try to veer into the cringy side of the touchy-feely stuff that people kind of roll their eyes out and try to have it be focused on the work at hand. Not that I'm anything against any of that, but, again, sure. It's meeting people where they are. What's their comfort for that? What's their culture?
And that's a great way to do a warm-up. You cross the bridge, you build a bridge across the chasm of comfort in the technology and also comfort with being with other people who they may or may not know, and with yourself. I mean, there's a lot of introductions to be done, so that's a really clever way of doing it.
And a little levity, like the story, of course, ended up being quite silly. So, getting some laughs in the first 10 minutes of a meeting is always a good thing.
Someone once said that one of the best ways to start a presentation is with a joke, just to relax everybody. I don't know if that's still true today, but it makes sense to me.
I would guess at this point, it would be, what type of joke are you making?
True enough. So let's take a step back here, because obviously if we're already at that point of picking the technology and having the meeting, the organization has already done some pre-work. They already know that they need some kind of strategic planning. So how would it, before they get to that point of doing this meeting, how would the organization know that they need strategic planning?
That's a good question. Sometimes it's as simple as we've finished the plan we did 3 years ago. I literally get people calling and they say, well, we've done everything in that plan. It's done and we need to do a new one. Sometimes they've never done it before and they have someone, maybe it's a new executive director, maybe it's someone on their board that's saying, it would really behoove us to spend some time to make sure that we're all on the same page, that we, really have a sense of where we all want to go together and move forward. What are the things where we want to put our energy and put our focus? And so oftentimes it's someone within the organization sees the need. And when there's been a leadership transition and when a new leader is coming on, it's a great time to do a strategic plan, because it enables them to, not probably in the very first months that they're there, but maybe 6 months in or a year in, to help them be part of shaping the organization's future. Sometimes I'll get an inquiry from a leader who's about to leave the organization, and they want to do a strategic plan then to kind of leave their stamp on the organization. And I counsel executive directors at that point to say, yes, we can do shorter term planning to, have a clear set of initiatives for the short term for the new person coming in, but really it's the new person's job to lay out what's the next chapter of that organization. The planning that you'll want to do is, what are the needs? And oftentimes an executive search firm will help an organization with this type of thing, where they're really taking an assessment of what is needed in this next chapter. And so what are we going to be looking for in our new leader? So it's a variety of different times that can be opportune. I think when it's not a great time to do a strategic plan is when there's a lot of conflict going on. So I would counsel the group to kind of address that conflict directly. And then when that's been resolved and people are ready to have more deliberate conversations, come back to the strategic planning process. Sometimes groups will ask for strategic planning because that's what they know to ask for. And you have to dig in and see, is this going to be a good time for you to do that? Or is it actually something else that's going on?
A lot of organizations try to self-diagnose.
Yes.
They're presenting the solution and the problem, or even just the solution without understanding the problem. And I've seen the same thing in technology. They think they need a particular widget to do something, but when you ask all the right questions, they actually needed something completely different. So it's great that you actually go through that qualification process beforehand to make sure that, yes, this strategic planning is actually what they need. So in terms of the whys, one thing I didn't notice or notice you didn't mention was when an organization is new, brand new out of the gates, is that a moment where SP is necessary, or is it really more once they've kind of surpassed their initial growing pains?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think when an organization is brand new, it's all planning, right? Because it's all an imagination, it's all a vision of what could be. And when an organization is new, and I don't tend to work with organizations that are brand new, I tend to work with organizations that are a little more mature, have staff, have a board, are a little more established. But at that beginning stage, again, you may not be able to forecast as far in the future because you're essentially setting out a set of experiments and pilots and seeing what's really gonna work. And so at that point, I would think that doing a little bit of shorter term planning would be useful, while at the same time knowing really what's your vision, right? So getting clear about what your mission is, getting clear about what that vision is in terms of what's the change that you're helping to see in the world because of the work that you're doing. Not that that won't evolve over time, it will, but being clear with the group that you've gathered to do that work together as a new organization, those can be some key points. And then what are some things that we're going to try that we think will move towards solving this problem, but holding them lightly so that, you know, if they don't work out as you plan, that you can make some adjustments.
Mm. And then, yeah, this is the first time I've heard of doing planning right before a ED leaves. And it totally makes sense that you're right, it should only be for a short period of time because the new ED will probably take things in a different direction. Does that happen very often? It's like, I understand the legacy part of things.
There's nothing like malicious about it. It's more the executive director wanting to really have the organization be in as good a spot as possible when they do that handoff. And I think there needs to also be that room for the new person, not necessarily to take the organization in an entirely new direction, but to put their stamp on it, to be part of the conversation, to be part of that vision casting for that next several years.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it also helps the new ED in the sense of they already have a plan for the first few months as they're getting their feet wet and getting to know the organization. So they don't need to worry about that particular element, and they can focus on it, once they are more familiar and more ingrained with the organization.
Yeah, having that short term, like, okay, this is what we want you to get accomplished in the first 6 months is really key. And, oftentimes a lot of that will be transferring all of those relationships that the executive director had introducing the new executive director to all your board members, helping them have time to get to know the staff, get to know your other supporters, your major donors, funders, et cetera, volunteers. So there's a lot of that needs to happen at the beginning for a really successful transfer to happen.
So then let's say now let's jump back into the actual activity itself. So we're doing the planning. It's that multi-day session. What are the basic deliverables once that plan is finished? What can people expect or organizations expect to receive out of it?
So before that happens, you mentioned pre-work, and there's a whole process of gathering information from people, doing one-on-one interviews, focus groups, perhaps a survey, mapping out who the stakeholders are that are really key to the organization's future, and getting their perspectives. And then the first deliverable from my point of view of the consultant is going to be the summary of all of that discovery. So the summary, the highlights that have emerged from those multiple conversations. And that helps the group start with a kind of a snapshot of where the organization is in its current state, what people see as the strengths, what people see as the challenges, what are people's hopes for the future. So we might kind of have, sometimes I think of it as kind of, here's your buffet table of all the different things that people are talking about in terms of possible new futures for the organization. Not that you're going to take all of it or eat all of it. It's not all going to happen, but these are the things that people are talking about. So that kind of starts and level sets the conversation so that everyone is starting from a common ground in terms of their understanding of the organization and their understanding of everyone's perspectives. And then over the course of time, whether it's a 1 day, a 2 day, or the multiple online sessions, they'll be looking at what's outside of them, what's going on in the wider ecosystem, what are the trends that they need to be paying attention to. Spend some time visioning, really kind of maybe getting a little more excited about some bigger possible futures that may or may not come to fruition, but kind of gets people's imagination going. And then honing in on what are the things that are going to be the most impactful, the most realistic, the most important for us to do in this next time frame. And then digging into, okay, so if these are the top 3 things we need to do, what are some steps that we're going to take to move that in that direction? And then also, what does success look like? So typically when I'm working with groups, I want them to have a rough draft of a plan by the time that group session finishes.
What does success look like? I love that question, because that's a question I think that has a lot of meat to it, a lot of value to it. And it's really actually the most important question. How do you know when you've heard that answer? Because some people might say, give an answer that's not really, it's like the issue of diagnosing their own problem. They think they have a solution, or they think they know what success looks like, but it's not really something either tangible or reachable or not quite there. It's not the root of the actual success. Is there a way that you can help flush out the actual answer?
Well, typically in that group session, there'll be at least 2 groups that are working on it and giving feedback. So it won't just be one group, that first draft. And so they've already gotten some feedback that, asks from the whole group, asking, what do they appreciate about what's been presented so far? What do they wonder about? What do they wish? What are some questions that they have? And so then the group goes back and tweaks it. And then ultimately it's the responsibility of a smaller group to refine that rough draft that comes out of the larger group process to really hone in on, okay, so this draft statement for this success indicator for this particular action step isn't very clear. Let's talk some more about what we really want, what's going to make sense, and make sure that someone who joins the organization tomorrow can understand what we've written here, so that you didn't have to be in the room. Making sure that all that language is clear, and so that there's adjustments that happen at that point.
And as these conversations continue, I imagine it's relatively obvious, but maybe not, which ones are the higher priority ones versus which ones can be saved for later. Does that kind of naturally bubble to the top, or is it more of a conversation to be had internally, or it's something you need to elicit?
There are ways to have it basically naturally bubble up through different types of facilitation techniques and just really see where the most energy is for those priorities. Sometimes when a group ends up at a stage in the process and they have, 7 different things that different people are excited about, I will actually literally have them do a ranking survey where I'm asking them to put them in 1, 2, 3, 4, what's the most important order, so that we can see where the energy is for the top 3. Because that prioritization needs to happen. I've seen strategic plans where the group has 7 major goals and it's just too much. Most organizations are already doing too much. And then to have that many goals, I think that's probably one of the things that makes plans kind of get ignored or sit on the shelf, is when they are trying to do too many things at once and folks don't know where to really prioritize their energy.
It's like the law of, it's not law of abundance, but it's more of a fallacy of choice. That's the word I'm looking for. When you got too many choices and when there's too many things to choose from, you end up not choosing anything.
Right.
So yeah,
you
having
kind of
that,
end up with that paralysis of, okay,
yep.
I could go there, I could go there, I could go there. What am I supposed to do? Which one today? And yeah, there's a lot of wasted energy. So helping the group make some decisions, which can be hard, they're all our darlings. So which of them are we going to focus on now? And also knowing it's what you're focusing on now. It's not forever.
Quite right. In the Salesforce world and in Salesforce and solution development in general, software development, there's usually a scale, easy to hard in terms of complexity, and then output or deliverable. It's not quite even the right word. It's more like how important is it? And we tend to rank things as if it's really high importance and really easy to do, that's probably the first that should be tackled, versus things that are lower priority and less complicated or more complicated. It's usually toward the bottom. Do you kind of have that chart as well, or is that something that just ends up being more of a consequence than anything else?
I think it's a really useful way to sort if there's just an abundance of so many good ideas, to be able to plot them out on, what's going to have the greatest impact, and what's going to be easy or hard, and to make sure that you are having a few things that are high impact but easier to do, so that it's not all the high impact, hard to do stuff. So there's a mixture there.
And
And
usually is
it's
it
going to depend on the context, right? Of what they need to do. And the group, I generally trust the group that they'll choose the thing that makes the most sense for them. But helping them go through that sorting process can make it clearer.
and then usually is it more sequential in terms of the delivering them, or is it more in parallel? If something, for example, is planned to take a very long time, would you recommend doing that in intervals throughout the year while working on the short-term goals, or is it really focus on one goal at a time in sequence?
Well, I'm going to give the consultant answer, which is it depends, right? I think if there's if one of the things that they recognize is that there's just a lot of internal confusion about who's doing what, what are the scope of the roles, tackling something like that first to lower the amount of confusion and help people work more effectively together could be a great place to start. But usually there's a mix of goals that are around strengthen the organization internally, and then goals that are supporting the mission. So I'm thinking of a group that I worked with where they had one around that was really focused on their staff, one that was really focused on financial sustainability, and one was an augment to one of their primary services that was going to just have them really great impact. And I would guess that different people were working on those different goals at different paces and probably in parallel. But yeah, again, not, deciding then, once you have the plan for that 3 to 5 year period, taking that next step of, okay, so what are we going to tackle in year one? What are we going to tackle in the first 3 months, 6 months? And you can't tackle all of it. Yeah. So deciding what are the best starting points to get things moving. And oftentimes it is, with the lower hanging fruit, what's the easier thing to get going, to have that momentum keep moving.
One of the reasons why I was really anxious and keen on talking to you today was the combination that you involve of strategic planning and DEI. And I know that DEI, it kind of molds itself into various other topics, but I've never, at least not yet, spoken to someone that does it with planning. And I'm curious to know, how do you incorporate DEI into your planning sessions?
Yeah, I mean, it's an evolving area, and I think it's one that more and more organizations are becoming aware of, that planning, it's not a neutral process. How are you ensuring that you're hearing the voices of the people who are most impacted? How are you centering those voices? How are you making it safe for people to really tell their whole truth about their experience of the organization? Being mindful of that, I think, at every step of the process. So it's not necessarily that the process is, that the tools you're using through the process are terribly different. It's the perspective that you're bringing at each stage. So, at that first stage where you're bringing together the group, one, do you have buy-in from the client that this isn't the job of a group of, a subset of the board to do the strategic plan on behalf of the organization. This is really a whole organization process if you're going to be successful and if you're really going to have buy-in. And, who are all the key people that need to be involved? And then what do they need in terms of support for them to be involved? So if you're asking people that you're serving to participate in interviews or a focus group, what supports are you giving them to show up? not assuming that they can show up and donate their time, that they may need to be compensated for their time and may need extra support to enable them to show up, whether it's on a Zoom call or, whether you're giving or in the room, childcare, other transportation stipend, those kinds of things, so that it's not just a token involvement of people who the organization actually serves, and so that voice is really included in the conversation. And I think an old style of doing strategic planning, and it's comes to who is doing it, and it's probably a lot of white people, and the white people perspective was they were in the dominant culture. They were of the dominant culture. They were represented in leadership, represented in all of these processes, and had a lot of blind spots to what isn't there. And so it's really about bringing that equity lens and being mindful of the different experiences and the different people that need to be involved at each step of the way, and the types of questions that you're asking, the types of conversations you're inviting people into.
The two main facets I see about these kinds of events would be making sure that there are a sufficient representation around the table to have the conversations to begin with. And the second facet would be making sure you're more mindful of the people you're trying to help, who your audience is, and keeping their considerations in mind. What happens when one of those situations is out of balance, whether you don't have enough representation up front or you're not considering the audience sufficiently? Are there ways, specific words to elicit more of a, hey guys, we're not considering this, or maybe we should spend a bit more focus on that kind of wording?
Yeah, I think it's really asking the question at every stage of what are the equity implications within what we're doing right now. Who are all the people who are impacted? Have we heard from them sufficiently? Are there other ways that we could go about this? Do we need to circle back? Have we moved through this too quickly? And we need to circle back and take another consideration of this. So it's really just is probably not the right word, but for me, it's being mindful at each stage of who you're including in the conversation. And the power dynamics also, that you're setting things up in a way that as much as is possible. I don't think you can really, I think it's a fallacy that you can guarantee anyone's safe space. But what can you do to enhance the psychological safety so that people feel comfortable sharing their full perspective and aren't holding it back?
Yeah, that's there has to be a safe space for that to happen, because there could be that a very strong opinion or a stronger opinion, let's say, about one particular topic, and someone who would like to raise their voice feels that they shouldn't because of the power struggle. Is there any mechanism that you employ that helps get that information, whether it's in that session itself or not maybe behind the scenes, but through other indirect means?
Well, one of it is mixing up the process when you're in the room with the group. So I think where that tends to happen the most is when you do everything in the whole group. The loudest, the most confident voices are going to speak the most. So mixing it up, working with breaking up into smaller groups, mixing people up so that they're talking to different people at different phases in different conversations. Not always working in groups, sometimes working where you're asking people to do an item individually, so that they giving people some time to think beforehand. Recognizing the different abilities. If it's on Zoom, have you got things set up so that people can use the closed captioning? I've just recently become more aware of all the things that you need to do to make documents more accessible to people with low vision and blindness. So it's being mindful of those things and really giving people different ways and different modalities to plug in and provide their perspective.
Why do you, it might be a very silly question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What do you think is the most important reason why we should consider DEI? Like, if we don't, in the event itself, or again, for the outcome and helping our mission, what would be the drawbacks of not including a sense of DEI?
I mean, I think basically the fundamental is, if you want to have a healthy culture, it's not healthy if it's not inclusive. And a healthy culture is going to help you move your strategy forward. And if you want to be successful with your mission, people need to be, feel like they can be fully engaged, be brave in the space, have a sense of belonging, to want to help you move the organization forward. And if all of that is behind closed doors, or not being dealt with directly, not being acknowledged, if there's harm that the organization may have done in the past that hasn't been acknowledged, if there's stuff going on in the culture that's not being acknowledged, all of that gets in the way of the organization being more effective. So, and that's doesn't sound like the right reason to do that, because it's really like, how can you be a better human and really, see and acknowledge all the people around you and what they bring. So for me, fundamentally, that's why. And you can't claim to have a healthy culture if you're ignoring all of those aspects of people's lived experience. If an organization is historically white-led organization, it's important for the group to work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and focus on that at least in my mind, before they're trying to integrate it into everything that they're doing, which would be part of, integrating it into their planning process, to really take some time to look at all of their processes, look at their culture, look at what's going on internally, and how the DEI lens can, what they need to know and what they need to learn to be more mindful of that and step into being anti-racist, and really focus in on that before trying to apply it in all the different areas, which it does need to happen. But I think that fundamental step needs to happen first.
And do you find that you need to introduce that topic, or do you find that they're becoming more aware of it outside or before, as part of the pre-work, let's say, before you come on board?
Yeah, I think where organizations are asking for centering equity within their strategic planning process usually is building on the type of work that I was just describing. And as an outsider, I can also ask the question and raise the issue. And that gives me then a sense of, do they need to go do that work first and then come back to doing strategic planning, or can we do both at once?
Have you ever refused a client because they didn't properly anticipate or manage or think of DEI?
Yeah, I have ended up at basically counseling the organization to really do that work more intentionally with someone who solely focuses on that before they so that there's more common ground across the staff and the board perspectives. Oftentimes there's a gap between staff and board in terms of understanding. There can be generational gaps. And so it's not refusing so much as saying, you know what, you'd be better off to go do this work first, and then put the planning process on pause for a bit, and then come back to see how you can pull it all together.
That makes sense. And I'm really grateful that in general, the public is becoming more and more aware of this, that it needs to be more inclusive, more.
Absolutely.
I love it. It's about time. It's a shame it took so long.
It's a waking up that's happening for many people.
What other major considerations do you think are involved in making sure that this whole endeavor is a success?
Well, I think recognizing that it does take some time, it does take some energy. So, again, if the organization has a lot of other things going on, it may not be the right time to do that. And it may not mean that they're in crisis. It may mean, they've just launched a capital campaign, or they're going through some other major change, or they're doing branding and they're doing, redoing some major technology thing. And if all of those things are going on at the same time, it's just overload for the staff. So timing, I think, is important. Having the time and energy to focus on it, and being willing, at least when for the groups that I'm working with, I want them to be willing to integrate the input of all their stakeholders, and not have it just be a few people in leadership are going to make all the decisions, and then wonder in a year why other people aren't excited about their plan for everybody.
Sounds very reasonable. That makes Total sense. I'm curious to know, Carol, what is in your future? What would you like to see, or what would you hope to plan, or any products or any services you're coming out with in the near future that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that I'm looking at with my podcast is to partner with somebody and have them come on, and we'll talk more about kind of what's going on in the nonprofit sector, what are the trends, and have a regular partner, maybe every quarter or every other month, on the podcast. So that's one thing that's kind of in the works. I'm also working with a copywriter to redo my website, so really refining what I'm offering people and around strategic planning, around how do they demonstrate their impact, and then how do they make decisions about what they might need to stop doing, which is often a question that nonprofits have a hard time grappling with. So excited to have that come to fruition and really step into all of those areas that are more on the analytical side, but I bring the analysis with that understanding of group dynamics and how people are thinking, how people are feeling when they're going through all these change processes.
I think it's great to have a colleague for a podcast. It would definitely alleviate the need for guests, and it's a great dynamic. I'm sure I've heard so many podcasts that have two people, and it flows really, really well, especially when you have a good point counterpoint type of perception.
Yeah, I won't be giving up the guests entirely. It's just
Okay.
adding in a one more type of episode for a little more variety. So I think it'll be fun.
Absolutely. And then when on the website side of things, a lot of people tend to forget that also, just like strategic planning, it isn't a one-time set and you're done. You have to keep on feeding the website, keeping it up to date, always refining it. You never reach perfection, but it's all about the constant evolution of the website to make it better, faster, and stronger.
Absolutely, and make sure that it reflects the evolution of where you are as a professional as well.
Absolutely. Awesome. Carol, thank you so much for joining me today. Where can people get in touch with you to find out more information or to hire your services?
Sure. So definitely, since you're a podcast listener, check out Mission Impact. It's the podcast for progressive nonprofit leaders who want to do better in the world without being a martyr to the cause. So check out Mission Impact. And then you can find me at gracesocialsector.com. And I'd love to hear from you.
Carol, thank you so much. It's been awesome.
Thank you.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.